Welcome to the Mental Health Multiverse.
We're your hosts,
HB
and LB. If you're also on a healing journey and enjoy pop culture, stick around. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of MHM. I'm LB, joined with my co-host, HB, with no guest today, but that's okay, because we are here to talk about one of HB's favorite Halloween movies, and she advocated so hard for this episode, so I'm excited to talk about it with her. Today we are talking about Kalabar from Halloweentown.
We sure are. And I just realized when I was watching the movie that if anyone hasn't seen the movie, the title of this episode is already a spoiler.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Because it's one of those classic like Disney twists where the person who's introduced as like the super nice guy who's helpful and over top like trying to be nice is actually the villain. And I was like, oh.
Well, I was
Anyone
also
hasn't
like,
seen it.
okay, yeah. So spoilers, we can't warn you ahead of time about spoilers, but I thought it was funny because when like the reveal happens or whatever, I was like, oh yeah, it's this charismatic politician who's the villain.
Who would have thought?
Oh no.
Well, and also something I would love to talk to you about is that watching this movie again through the lens of this podcast and after having analyzed all of the Pixar movies that we talked about our previous season, this movie reminds me a lot of Turning Red in terms of how the mom is kind of like trying to protect her children from this like generational, it's, you know, in Turning Red it's a curse, but in this it's like their
legacy,
roots, as she calls them, like their heritage, even though it's like a fictional heritage, right? It's like very similar how the mom is sort of trying to protect the kids. So I have some questions for you in the future about,
and I have a lot of thoughts about it, so
great.
Perfect.
I'm glad we're on the same page. But yeah, so this movie came out in October of 1998, so I would have just turned 9 years old. And this was my Halloween movie. I know we talked about in Hocus Pocus, like everyone was like, that was our Halloween movie. We watched it every year. We did it at trick-or-treating, whatever. No, Halloweentown was always my family's. Like, I didn't say this in the Hocus Pocus episode, but my mom hated Hocus Pocus. So we actually didn't watch it because she didn't like it. And one thing, if you know me and if you know my mom, you know that she loves Halloween and horror, and she's like a big influence into a lot of the things that I enjoy about this time of year. So, and the fact that like she watched Halloweentown with us, still watches Halloweentown with us every year, like it's definitely a tradition. So I was shocked when I found out that there was a movie that she kind of kept from us and was like, we are not watching this as part of our Halloween tradition. And when I asked her about it, because I watched Hocus Pocus for the first time as an adult not too long ago, I was like, why didn't we watch this? And she was like, because I hated it. I was
Did
like,
she say why? So
I think it was ahead of its time in terms of like campiness and just like I like when it came out. I think it's a lot of the things that we discussed in the Hocus Pocus episode, but it's got to do with the fact that it came out not around Halloween, and I just think my mom thought it was way too over the top. Which is interesting because her favorite scary movie of all time is Fright Night, which if you've seen that is like very campy and over the top. But I think she saw it as like not trying to be, where it's like sometimes if something is very campy and self-aware, it's seen as good. But if it's campy and like not self-aware, it's seen as bad.
Yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say? So I think that's how my mom viewed Hocus Pocus. But I think that I've kind of like turned her on to it, or I think that like I just think something has shifted. It's definitely not part of her rotation every year, but she knows that I enjoy it and that I'm a huge fan, and I think she's just sort of like, okay, I will allow you that now. You are an adult, you can make your own decisions. Like,
yeah.
But yes, Halloweentown in the rotation every year. I also have like a very fun fact about it, which I didn't know until I was researching this episode, but it's Disney Channel's second original movie. So it's only the second Disney Channel original movie. The first one is called Brink, which I don't remember off the top of my head.
You don't know Brink?
I don't know Brink. I don't think I've ever seen it.
Oh my God. It's great. I mean, it's definitely okay. Now that all makes sense because we recently watched it. Okay, I don't know if it was very recently. The weekly movie night that I'm always talking about on this podcast, we watched it because we were in like a DCOM era marathon and we watched Brink. And that makes sense because when I think of Brink, I think like this is not peak, but this is like the epitome of a Disney Channel original movie. It's about a bunch of kids.
Like quintessential.
Yeah. It's a bunch of kids that rollerblade. That's all you need to know.
Okay.
But
Adorable.
that's interesting because I feel like there were more before that, unless it was like straight
so
to DVD.
It's the second that was in production, but it was the fourth one to air. So it didn't they filmed it, but because it's a Halloween specific movie, they didn't release it second. It was the fourth original Disney movie to air, but it was the second one in production. So yeah, it's not, there are some in between.
Gotcha. Yeah, because there are some other ones I'm thinking of now, like Alley Cats. That's about a bunch of kids that love bowling. Anyway, that era was really fun. And I remember watching Brink on Disney Channel as a kid. But we're not here to talk about Brink. We're here to talk about Halloweentown. So you mentioned it came out in October of 1998. Specifically, apparently, it came out October 17th, 1998, which is my birthday. And at that time, I would have been born already. I was born in 95. So I turned 3 years old when this movie came out. And I never watched it until 3 years ago. So for dedicated listeners of the podcast, it comes as no shock to anybody that I wasn't allowed to watch Halloween movies growing up. So this one definitely did not get to see until I was an adult. It's very 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, but I can see why it was such a cult classic. It's very funny, very cute. I forgot Debbie Reynolds is in it. I mean, she's like
the queen. Bow down to grandma.
Yeah, she is grandma. And then I recognize the mom from Nashville, if anyone else watched that, with Hayden Panettiere, and I forget the other redhead lady's name, but she was in Friday Night Lights. Anyway, but yeah, it's really cute. We watched all of the Halloweentowns, I believe, for our movie night. So I've definitely seen the second one. I don't remember it off the top of my head. And then there's the one that's like Return to Halloweentown with what's her face. And
oh my God, don't talk.
Do we not talk about that one? Okay, we don't talk about that one.
Well, it's just kind of shady. They just kind of did the actress who plays Marnie wrong. They literally wouldn't agree to paying her what she felt like she deserved because she's truly the lead of those movies, right? Like she is 100% the lead, and they were not paying her as such. And she was trying to negotiate, like, I would like to be paid better. And so, and they wouldn't pay her. So she decided not to do it. And I commend her for that because it's like, wow, this is your franchise. Like, you are the face of this franchise. You choosing not to do it. And I think it did have an impact. I've never seen, or if I have seen it, I don't remember it. It must have been like maybe once when it aired.
It came out,
but I've never seen it.
2006, because I think that was the first Halloweentown movie I saw as a kid, because I don't think my mom realized what was on the TV, and she was just like, oh, okay, yeah. But it was weird because like my mom let me watch Twitches, which was, you know, the Twin Witches, and she liked that one. I don't know why. Anyway, I don't know. My mom has a habit of just kind of like moving the line and
flip-flopping. Ugh.
But anyhow, I remember though watching this for movie night, and just like the main critique that we were all, it's not like a critique, but it's a thing that we kept noticing, is how they're always like, the Cromwells are the most powerful. Cromwell this, Cromwell that. And we're like, but you've also like, that is very much to me showing. No, that is very much me telling and not showing. Like, you're just telling me the Cromwells are very popular, but you have yet to give me any indicate, like, you haven't shown me how powerful they are. No, I mean, we definitely get a little bit of it at the end, you know, in the big fight, and they're all holding hands, and it's the power of the Cromwells that defeats the forces of evil. But leading up to it, I was like, okay, she's like, what does that mean? And then it kind of turned into a drinking game, because I think it comes up in the second movie of like, every time they mention how powerful the Cromwells are, take a shot. Anyway.
Well, they do. I mean, at the end of the second movie, they do change the rules on when the portal happens just because they wanted to. So that's pretty powerful.
No, No, it is. It is
Yeah.
pretty powerful. And my door just closed very spooky.
I know. I saw that. I was like, is that a cat doing that?
Oh, it's
Goodbye, door.
Nate. He's probably like, you're shouting right now. Too bad. Anyway, we've already given so much away as far as like the plot and the villain and the twist, but do you want to go ahead and give people who haven't seen the movie or haven't seen it in a while, since it did come out 20 some years ago, a brief recap?
Yeah, for sure. So this movie basically starts on Halloween night at a house that seems like just normal, regular people. They're passing out candy for Halloween, but the mom is very much like not a Halloween person. She's not wearing a costume, and her her youngest daughter is longingly staring out the window like,
Me
I would
on
love to be
Halloween.
trick-or-treating. Yeah, I was like, LB probably relates to this hard.
Oh my god, so much.
And the oldest daughter, Marnie, loves Halloween, and she's very much like basically starts this fight with her mom, like, why can't we be normal like all of the normal people who go out and celebrate Halloween? And her mom is like, because it's stupid. Like, and basically they get into this fight. And I just have to say, I'm interrupting the synopsis to say this. I love
Interrupting yourself.
Yeah. I love the dynamic of the three siblings. And I had never realized this before, but I was kind of trying to give them all a place. And the oldest daughter is like the dreamer. She kind of has these unrealistic, sort of almost naive ideas of how the world works. And then the brother is very like logic, reason. I need an explanation for why everything happens. And then the youngest is very intuitive. So she just follows whatever her gut is saying, or she happens to always be looking in the right place at the right time. Or if she wants something, she can make it happen. And so I thought that was really cool, how it's like they have this like very kind of floating off the ground, head in the clouds. They have the grounded, so like rooted into the ground that they can't move. And then they have the one that's sort of just like going wherever she's needed. And I really like that about their sibling dynamic. But anyway, so their grandma comes, and their grandma is this very eccentric woman. She has a bag that seems like the Mary Poppins bag, where you stick your hand in and anything that you want comes out of it. And the grandma gives the kids this book, and it's called Halloweentown. And she starts reading it to them, and she's like, oh, there's this town called Halloweentown, and it's where all the witches
Can I
and everything.
interrupt too, real quick? Just to say that she is telling them about Halloweentown right after the mom specifically asks her to not do this. And I have a lot of thoughts and notes about that, but I just wanted to throw that in there for context. And yeah.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. She's doing it though through like storybook. So it's not like she's directly saying like, this is Halloweentown. But anyway, so long story short, the kids go to bed. The grandma's down in the kitchen having an argument with the mom because, as LB just said, she was like, you deliberately disobeyed me. Like, I told you not to tell the kids about Halloweentown, and here you go. And the grandma's like, well, it's Marnie's 13th Halloween. She's 13. This is when she needs to come into her witchy powers. If she doesn't come into her witchy powers tonight, she will never be a witch. And the mom is like, that's good. I want her to be a human. Because backstory of the mom is a witch, but she married a human man, and their dad is a human man. And we actually never find out what happened to the dad, ? But he's no longer in the picture. So then Marnie comes down the stairs, hears them arguing about the fact that Marnie is a witch and is going to lose her powers. The grandma leaves, and Marnie follows. Actually, no, Marnie goes up and tells her brother what happened. And he's like, you've had a little too much candy.
I loved his line. He was like, so insanity is hereditary. Let's hope boys are immune. He has all of these like really quick,
he's got really good
one-liners that I'm like, oh my gosh, so sassy.
So snazzy. And then so they follow the grandma to this mythical bus stop, and they follow her onto the bus, and the bus transports them to Halloweentown. And then they get off the bus, and it turns out that the youngest, Sophie, has followed them there as well. And then basically there's something happening at Halloweentown. The littlest one calls it the bad thing, which I think is like a cool way of talking about whatever's going on there. And basically people are disappearing, they're changing, and essentially the grandma is trying to stop it herself. She tries to recruit her daughter to help her, which is why she went to the mortal world. She was like, I need your help. There's something happening in Halloweentown. And then the kids decide that they want to help grandma. However, the mom finds out that they're gone. The mom comes back, demands that they go home. So they obey, which I was like, okay, Marnie, you obey, because she's very sassy.
The way
The
she
way
talks
she
to her
diso-
mother.
Yeah.
Oh my word.
Yeah. Yeah. I would have been smacked a couple times, not gonna lie.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, so where was I in the story? So yeah, so the mom is like, we're leaving, but then it turns out that the bus stop is run by this two-headed man who is just arguing with himself, and they can't figure out when the bus is coming, so they decide to go to the mayor for help. And the mayor is a man named Kalabar, who is a very sweet man who they've bumped into a couple of other times and has been very pleasant in their initial meetings. And it turns out that Kalabar and their mom had a thing when they were younger, and it's really awkward. They have a little tension, and she's surprised to see that he's mayor. And so fast forward, he gets an emergency message and disappears. And then they see that grandma has bumped into this kid named Luke, who is a troublemaker. He's a wiener, as he's called multiple times throughout the movie.
Dude.
The wiener dude. So they go follow grandma to make sure she's okay. And guess what? She's not, because all of the evil, bad thing stuff is happening in this closed off movie theater. And Kalabar is essentially putting people to sleep, he's freezing them so that he can use them later for his ultimate plan, whatever that means. And so they all appear right as Kalabar is trying to freeze the grandma, and he ends up freezing their mom, and then he does freeze the grandma, but she has just enough time to sort of allude to what they should do to stop the spell. And they have a Merlin's talisman, and they have a list for ingredients that they need to make a potion to put inside of the talisman to turn it on. And so they ensue on a little adventure to collect all of those ingredients, brew it, put it in the talisman, and then they have to, once they do that, they have to put the talisman inside of the pumpkin in the center of Halloweentown. And they succeed through the power of siblingness. I almost said friendship, but they're siblings. So through the power of family and magic, I guess, through the power of the youngest child's memory, because she actually remembered the spell. And also with the help from Luke, which I think is really sweet. He has a bit of a redemption arc throughout the movie. And then yeah, they think they defeat Kalabar, but actually they just unfreeze everyone. And then Kalabar comes out and he's like, you will never defeat me. And he steals the talisman back. And then that's when all the witches and the brother hold hands and hum. And then he gets sucked into the talisman, or he disintegrates. I don't think it's very clear what happens to him, but he disappears. And then that's essentially the movie. They decide that they're going to let Marnie become a witch, and that's how it ends. And the mom invites the grandma to come live with them, which in the second movie we find out was a mistake because they fight all the time. So
so it was not like quite happily ever after for them.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was the right move after the grandma has consistently crossed so many boundaries. And on the other hand, and I guess I'm just going to go into my little spiel about this, like,
yeah,
the mother is very clear about her wants and needs, about how she wants to parent and raise her children. And her mother is crossing those lines because she has ideas of how the kids should be raised. I don't love that. I don't love how Agatha is disrespecting Gwen's boundaries, but I also agree that the kids should get a say and a choice instead of having that choice made for them. And I think that's a really good example of how our parents try to do. Sometimes they make choices and try to do what they think is best for us, and it can hurt us sometimes. And parents are
well, that was my
perfect.
question for you. My question for you was, do you think that by hiding the fact that her kids are magical, is that ethical, or is that her right and choice as a mom? I know it's existential.
It's a little existential. It's definitely very nuanced. It's not as black and white as like she was wrong or she was right. I think she had good intentions as far as like she came from that world. So she knows all the complications and all the potential dangers that come with having powers and being a witch, and how it doesn't translate well into the human world. But then I think there was also a risk that like if they were to claim their powers, they would have to be exiled to Halloweentown, right? Because that was like Calabar's whole thing. Like, we've been exiled here to the second class world, and it's our right to rule the human race or whatever. Which also,
Yeah.
isn't he a human? Like, I know he's a warlock, but he's a human, right?
Well, I think that technically, because of the magical element of him, he is not a human. He is a warlock. So like there is not there is a difference.
See, because I've been playing a lot of Baldur's Gate, to me it's like warlock is not a race. Like you in, you know, like in character creation, you choose a race, and like you can be a human, and then your class is warlock.
Right.
And technically, on that same vein, the Cromwells aren't warlocks, because like they say that Dylan, the middle child, the boy, the man of the house, quote unquote, that he calls himself, is a warlock. But in the D&D world, which is like really my only gateway into the magical, fantastical stuff, warlocks have a patron, and that's where their magic comes from. But sorcerers get their powers from within. So because the Cromwell magic seems to just like come from being a Cromwell, and it's like hereditary, to me that makes it seem like they're more sorcerers than warlocks. But I digress. That's not, we're not here to analyze the magic of Halloweentown.
The lore. Yeah.
I'm basically, I'm stalling because I'm trying to think of how, like, the best way to answer your question, because it's complicated. I think, okay, so the way I'm seeing it, like how she is protecting Sophie, or like hiding it from Sophie, because she's just so young, and it's like complicated to explain that to a young child who again is living in a mortal world where there isn't a lot of magic. I think that makes sense, because you're trying to protect them from potentially using their magic at school, raising questions, having the government get involved, or whatever. But around Marnie's age, I do feel like that is an okay time to begin to explain everything.
Well, it's the only time she has, because her, like, after her 13th Halloween passes, she no longer has the choice or option. Yeah.
And like you had said, the mom wants that. She's like, I just want her to be human, but that's not fair. And that's where I'm like, like, I think the mom and grandma are both thinking very black and white, but there's a lot more nuance and complexities in it.
Well, and in the second movie, you find out the stakes a little more. I think the stakes are a little wishy-washy in the first one, but like in the second movie, we find out that if Marnie stays in Halloweentown, she will be gone a century before next Halloween happens in the mortal world.
Interesting.
Yeah. So because of time working differently there, because of how time works differently in Halloweentown.
Yeah.
If she goes to Halloweentown for a year, she will have been gone from the mortal world for 100 years. And that's like huge stakes to not get trapped there, or to stay there, or to want to be there. Yeah.
So in the first movie, then, when the grandma shows up, they're like, we haven't seen her in over a year. So then how long was she gone? Was it just like a couple days, like a week in her time at Halloweentown?
Yeah, I have no idea. I honestly, the way that time works, I don't understand, because then I was also like, if the mom dated Kalabar when they were in high school, then wouldn't he be like ancient by now?
Right. They're like the same age.
Yeah. So I think that's just like, I don't think we're touching that. I'm just trying to say that they tried to make stakes that don't make sense. Or if there's someone listening who's like, actually, I've done all the math in here.
Please share. Yeah.
We'll share it with the world if you understand how it works.
Yeah.
That would be great, because that was a question I had. I was like, wait, if time works differently, how are they still the same age? Just wondering.
I mean, and that's what I was wondering too. I was like, she is a witch. Does she age at the witch? Like, does she witchy years, or does she age in human years? Because I thought it would
honestly,
be cool
that's
if,
confusing too, because the grandma says that she's been around since King Arthur times. So I'm like, she's old.
Right? Yeah. So how old is Gwen? At what point did Gwen come into the more? Anyway. That is a whole other topic and thing.
Well, I had a question too. Well, staying on the theme of like the mom and everything, I personally also think her motivations for protecting the kids are unclear, I do like what you said about like there is risk in having magic and all of that, but the way in which she is so protective, it makes me wonder, like, why did she want to leave Halloweentown so badly? And
yeah.
is the only reason she left because she fell in love with a human? Like, and that's my big question mark. And I'm like, that's all? It's not like, because here's what I'm envisioning for higher stakes, and you let me know if you're with me here. What if some sort of magic killed her husband, and that's why she doesn't mess with it anymore, because he's no longer with us because of magic? That heightens her reason for being like, y'all are not allowed to touch magic. But she's just sort of like, what I say goes no matter what, which I guess is like you're allowed to do, but like it feels like there's more there.
Yeah.
And there's not.
No, I agree. That's a good point, because even by the end of the movie, it's still not clear why she was so resistant. Do they go into that at all in Halloweentown 2?
No. No. And I am still curious, like maybe it's in further movies, maybe they say it, but like I just watched the first two, and to my knowledge, they never explain what happened to their dad, their human father. He's just no longer in the picture. So did he die? Did he leave? Did he, like, because the only thing that's said about him is that he's a human. And then obviously we'll talk about Kalabar's motivations later, but like Kalabar hated him because he was a human. And then at the very beginning of the first movie, Marnie is like, Dad loved Halloween. And then the brother is like, Mom doesn't like you talking about Dad. That's it. That's like all we hear. And they met at a Halloween party.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
The mom and the dad. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree that I think there are a lot of things there that could be fleshed out to, like you said, raise the stakes or at least make them clearer, because it's like magic for her is year round. Like that's her life. It's not just on Halloween. So for her to be like specifically like no Halloween is kind of weird.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's just like my, the mom, I just think she's a little unjustified in her excess. Like absolutely not. You know what I mean?
Overprotectiveness and not communicating and not being clear and just being that typical like what I say goes kind of parent. And then on the flip side, Marnie talks to her so disrespectfully and so rude and knows exactly what to say to hurt her mom. And I know that she apologizes at the end, and I think they both apologize and both recognize that they were in the wrong in their own ways, but also in the right in their own ways. But like you said, if I talked to my mother that way, oh boy, I don't even know what I would do if a child talked to me like that now. I'll just say the mother has incredible patience, and oh yeah.
Yeah.
Gwen.
Yeah.
Oh, Gwen. Anyway, switching gears a little bit to the villain of our episode. What are your thoughts and feelings about Kalabar as a villain? You advocated really hard for this episode, so I'm just gonna throw this to you. Let you take the stand.
I just really wanted to do
you just really want to talk about
spooky
Halloweentown.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to do some like spooky discussions around spooky season. So that's what I wanted. But I think it's interesting because I've never watched Halloweentown through the lens that we specifically do for this podcast. So I think it changes things,
Yeah.
It really does when you're like analyzing someone, right? You're like, oh, what are his motivations? Why does he behave like this? What can we learn from him? And really, I mean, his motivation is that, actually, let me rewind. The grandma explains that Halloweentown was created because the creatures and the mortals used to live together in what is now known as the mortal world. But humans were afraid of the creatures and started, for lack of a better word, oppressing them is all I can think of.
Yeah.
And that's what turned the creatures evil. It was their reaction to being oppressed by the humans. And then the grandma says, we are not evil. They turned us that way. And then we decided, for the safety of both parties, to create a world all of our own. And so she made it basically sound like Halloweentown is their safe space, and they can only go back to the mortal world on Halloween because it's the only night of the year that they are safe to do so. The way that Kalabar sees it is that Kalabar sees the creation of Halloweentown as an exile from the mortal world. And he sees it as a punishment rather than an empowerment, right? The grandma looks at Halloweentown as this like beautiful place where she and people like her can live in happiness and harmony. And Kalabar sees
Utopia.
it's their Utopia, yeah. But Kalabar sees it as he has been pushed out of a place that is rightfully his. And so I guess he kind of sees Halloweentown as a prison. And so what he was doing by freezing the souls was he was creating an army, and then he was going to take that army into the mortal world to reclaim it as their own. So his motivation, I guess, is that he feels like the mortals pushed him out of a place that he has a right to be. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong if you think about displacement in terms of people being pushed out of where they belong.
Sure. Yeah.
It's very relevant right now.
100%.
And so, he's not 100% wrong, but I think like,
but I feel sorry, I was just going to say that wasn't very clear. Like watching it, someone who's only seen this movie twice, just finished watching it an hour ago. His motivation seemed to be Gwen dumped me, married a human, and now I hate all humans. Like,
okay.
Yeah.
I see that.
Yeah.
Let me read to you his direct quotes that he's like, so
please.
Here's what's happening. There's chaos ensuing in Halloweentown. And this is right before, so Luke is a goblin. And Luke is one of my favorite characters. Luke is a goblin, and he teams up with Kalabar because Kalabar makes him handsome. And we'll talk about that in a minute too.
Yeah.
Kalabar makes him handsome. And so he was like, I'm going to help this person because he did a spell on me to make me look handsome. And what Luke realizes is that Kalabar is actually like a really bad person, and he's hurting people, and he's hurting people that Luke cares about. Like Luke may come off as a snotty wiener, as called in the movie, but he really cares about the Cromwells. As you can see, when Agatha gets hit by the magic, he is so deeply affected by it. He's like, you told me you weren't going to hurt her. And so that's when he decides to help them, because he's like, Kalabar just told me he wanted the talisman. He didn't tell me he was going to hurt your grandma. So Luke decides to help. And then Kalabar is up on the front of City Hall or wherever. He's giving a speech. And I'm going to tell you his speech, but you might not have heard it because there's so much shit going on while he's giving this speech. So Kalabar's speech, while he's giving this speech, Luke is talking to Marnie like, I'm going to help you. And she's like, get out of my face. Like, so that's when all of this is happening, right?
Okay.
So Kalabar's quotes are, I offer you the chance to return to our days of glory, to end this exile from the mortal world. Versus dying.
Keep going. You have to keep doing that voice now, please.
To end this exile from the mortal world which the humans have stolen from us. Too long have we been exiled to this second-class world, forced to live here in this Halloweentown, to celebrate evil within us, to revel ourselves as we really are. And then he reveals that he's Kalabar. And then, follow me, and together we will reclaim the mortal world, which is rightfully ours. So that's his speech that he gives.
Okay.
And then once the mom comes, then he says, you could have had me, the most powerful warlock of all, but you chose a human instead. So that's like, he gives that whole big speech, and then it seems like the ending.
It's like, you could have, because I remembered that part. He was like, you could have been my queen. We could have ruled together. And I was like, and I think I wrote that down in my notes. I was like, so his whole motivation is that he's just butthurt. He got dumped by Gwen.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. But as you heard in the speech that I gave, he actually has motivation, right?
Yeah. And it's pretty, strong motivations. There was a character we talked about in our What Makes a Villain episode, and I know you haven't watched a lot of the Star Wars stuff yet, but there's another character named Morgan Elsbeth who we are told her motivation for being a bad guy is wanting to reclaim her culture because they are wiped out by the Empire. And that feels very similar here, but also similar to these two characters. I feel like the execution of that is not well done, and it's not very clear, because I just thought he was a simp boy and got friend zoned.
Well, I also think it's like a combination of the two, right? Like, it is a kids movie, so they're not gonna be like, let's make this about Exile.
Yeah.
But they played up the fact that they had dated before, and they kind of played up the awkwardness between the two of them. So I think it's like, even though he had a different motivation that was probably stronger, they were like, kids can't relate to that motivation. Let's make it seem like she broke his heart. I also think that it's a combination of the two, right? Like, maybe he didn't hate the mortal world so much until, right? Like, maybe he felt a little exiled, and maybe he felt, bad about being in Halloweentown, but he didn't hate them until a woman broke his heart and chose to live there over living in Halloweentown. So maybe it's a combo of the two, which I do think weakens his motivation, because you know how I feel about that. But I do think that it could be a combo. But again, poorly executed if you really think about it.
Yeah. It does feel like, now that you've kind of broken all of that down for me, it feels very much like, God, what movie were we talking about where someone goes on this whole speech about, okay, I'm relating this to Zootopia, where Nick Wilde goes on this whole speech about how people only ever saw him as the bad guy, so he became the bad guy, right? And I think that's a lot of, one of the things we are exploring this season as far as villain goes is like societal influence. How has society's perception or treatment of the villain contributed to their identity and actions? And so I think, and we don't know how long Kalabar has been around. We don't exactly know how old he is, but considering that witches and warlocks can live for fucking ever, I guess, he might have had a really long time to build up this resentment against humans, possibly. And then getting exiled was like part of the equation. Gwen dumping him for a human. Well, I don't even know if it was like she dumped him for a human, or like she dumped him ... and then dated a human. You know what I mean? And then married a human and had children with him. Whatever. Anyway, and then I guess that it contributes to the equation.
I do think it's interesting that he became mayor, like trusted. Well, you talked about this at the beginning, like politician, right? Like, he became mayor, a very well trusted, well liked figure in the Halloweentown community, and
that
yet
was their first mistake.
He doesn't care about Halloweentown. Like, he wants to destroy it, essentially, or use it to go into the mortal world.
He just sees them as pawns, and he thinks that because they're here, they will agree with him that they should use the fear that the humans have to conquer the mortal realm.
Right.
I did have questions about like how their government works, but again, I'm getting like too deep into it. I'm like, why do they need a mayor? Why wouldn't it be the most powerful? Because they're always talking about the Cromwells being the most powerful, and I'm like, shouldn't the Cromwells then be the governing power? I don't know. Where did this guy come from? What's his lineage? What's his connection? How does one become mayor? Do they vote? Is it a democracy? Anyway. But yeah,
he
so
did say to the mom, he does go, oh, you didn't hear about the election? So they do vote.
Oh, okay. There we go. Nice.
Yeah.
Interesting. Who gets to run? Anyway, whatever. Okay, moving on. So that's a little bit about their background and motivation. As far as personality traits, you mentioned very charismatic at first, and then I guess not. He's kind of a dick. Just
I think
to his will.
If we're going with what we've been talking about, sort of attachment styles, he's a very insecure attachment, right?
Yeah.
Especially if we equate his motivation being somehow tied to Gwen not wanting to date him. That is the most insecure.
Yeah.
And we've all been there. I can relate to like going through a breakup and being like, you know what? I'm going to come out of this better than ever, but not like conquer a whole universe.
I'm going to show them, and I'm going to become mayor of the tri-state area. I don't know. Coping mechanisms, I mean, they're definitely unhealthy.
Yeah, power, I would say, I guess, is like, he's just I can't get what I desire through just being me. I'm just gonna
So I'm gonna
take from
assert
everyone
my
else.
authority over them. Yeah. Do you
Mhm.
feel like there were any moments where he shows vulnerability or a desire for connection?
Only with Gwen. And I
Yeah.
think that it's when he sees her for the first time and she shows him affection of like, oh my gosh, you're Mayor. You know, like the and he gives
She
her the
was very
rose.
mature about the whole thing, I will say.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wouldn't say that he was necessarily vulnerable with her, but it felt the most real. Like I think
Mhm.
anything else we saw of him was him putting on a show of like, this is Mayor me. And then I think when he saw Gwen, it was a little of that wall coming down and him sort of being like, this is the girl I had crush on, you know, and bump into an ex. I just sort of like wasn't expecting this.
Woo. Yeah. Yeah.
And
That makes
then
sense.
when obviously when we see him when he's evil, he's just completely unhinged. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That makes sense. Do you see potential for redemption? And what do you think would need to have happened for them to change? Is there redemption in the second movie? I don't remember the second movie at all.
I can tell you about the second movie. So the second
Okay.
movie, somehow Calabar has a son that was hidden away.
Oh, right.
And so Calabar is seeking revenge for the Cromwells killing his father. And or Calabar's son, whose name is Cal, creative Disney, very creative.
Calabar. Nice.
Did they do that with what's the Descendants too? Aren't like some of the young ones
Oh,
just like
Mal from Maleficent and
Red is from the Queen of Hearts? Like
yeah.
so creative. But I guess they're like, we gotta make sure the kids know. We gotta help them connect the dots.
Yeah. They couldn't name
Yeah,
them like Sophia or something. That wouldn't make any
right.
sense.
No. But so anyway, Cal comes back for revenge for his father, and he does something called like a creature spell, which it does not seem like Cal's motivation is to come into the mortal world and take over like his father was. His motivation is really just revenge. So he puts a spell on Halloweentown that turns all of the creatures there into a caricature of humans, which I thought was a
Mm.
funny because the grandma explains it as like, because Marnie is like, this is humans aren't this boring. And the grandma's like, well, this is a caricature of humans, much like when you dress up for Halloween, it's a caricature of these creatures. And I thought that
Oh, that
was
is
a
interesting.
funny
Yeah.
little parallel. But yeah, so like it's very like black and white. They're wearing very boring clothes. They talk like this, it's like the caricature of a human.
Yeah.
And then in the mortal world on Halloween, when the clock strikes midnight, everyone who's dressed as a creature will be permanently transformed into that creature. Yeah.
Oh, that's a fun little twist.
Yeah. And so the stakes of that are that if Marnie gets trapped in Halloweentown, she's stuck there for a century in the mortal world. And then she can't use her magic while she's there because of this gray spell that's going on. Or she can't
Mm.
open the portal. She can still use magic, but she can't open the portal until the gray spell has been eliminated. And the portal closes at midnight. So it's not only does this thing happen, but also all the people are turned into creatures. Da 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 da. And that's when, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, the Cromwells miss the deadline and the portal closes. So midnight happens. All of the humans have been turned into creatures. And they're like, we have failed because we can't open the portal again because it's after midnight. And then Marnie's like, we're Cromwells. Someone made this portal in the first place. Why don't we just make it so that we can open it whenever we want? And then
Because we're
it.
Cromwells.
Yeah. So then they do. And they make it so that the portal can open whenever they want. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
So yeah.
So not much as far as like redemption and change goes. I guess in the
No.
in the first movie, he just kind of gets zapped and disintegrates. Would you say there could have been a better fate worse? There could have been a fate worse than death?
This is gonna sound very wish-like, but him getting trapped in the talisman, maybe. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I
Or
think,
him losing his powers.
yeah, I was gonna say him getting exiled to the human world without his powers, I think could have
Yeah.
been an interesting
Yeah.
thing. Or I think I think for me too, and I know this was like it's a Disney Channel original movie. They couldn't do too much with it. It's a children's movie. It was late 90s. I feel like the stakes could have been raised if we saw any indication that what his plan was leaking into the mortal realm at all. Like if he was already on track to possibly succeeding, because everything feels very like isolated within Halloweentown. So
Mhm.
I get that, there are some stakes, but we haven't been in Halloweentown enough to like develop an attachment to it for us to want it to stay safe. But I think if anything had been leaking into the mortal realm, it would have been like, oh no, like maybe when Sophie is using her powers on accident, she doesn't even know that there's some like darkness, kind of leeching onto it or something. And then the big climax of the standoff between the two parties is like him realizing the harm that he's doing, not just to
Mm.
potentially the humans, but also maybe what he's doing to the citizens that he has developed a relationship with. And then he uses his powers for good, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. It
But
does not seem like he cares about
he
them.
does not. No, no. But
Yeah. But
yeah,
I think the second movie kind of because it's like happening in both worlds, it kind of does do that interweaving of the two.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also, you said it was like a Disney original movie and it wasn't supposed to be very dark. Apparently, it was supposed to have an alternate ending, which I didn't know until I was researching for this podcast. And I
Mhm.
also didn't know what it was. And I just looked it up, and it is that Marnie, instead of the talisman going into the pumpkin in the town square, she would have had to walk through a dark forest to place the talisman. And the forest is like a forest where she ages, and she would have aged as she walked through the forest. They even did
Whoa.
that apparently, because it says the crew made a plaster of Kimberly J. Brown's face and they made masks for her transitions, but it was rewritten. And yeah,
Wow. All that work.
all that work. Well, I guess they didn't make the mask. They made the mold of her face, and then they were gonna
Oh.
make, but she has the mold of her face as a memento. So this is all coming from Google, so you can be like, that's not true, Heather. But that's what it seems like, because I was confused because I looked it up and it said it was supposed to have a much darker ending, and I was like, what? And that was the much allegedly darker ending. I don't really know.
That she would
That
have
she
like aged
aged.
to be her grandmother's age and they could have been old
Yeah.
Cromwells together, I guess.
Old Cromwells together. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Something we've been doing in these episodes is kind of ranking the villains, who is the most villainy of all. Villainy? Who is the most villainous of all? Where would you put Calabar on this?
I don't know. I really
Yeah.
don't. It's funny because you have written the list and I have not. And I don't think ours will be exactly the same. So I'm looking at
Oh,
your
I don't
list.
think so. Yeah.
One being
Again,
most evil. Okay.
yeah. Again, I feel like he had plans and he was in like the very beginning stages of this plan. Like he was not even on phase 2 of 3 yet. Like he was still in phase 1A and they stopped him.
Yeah.
And I feel like he didn't really get any headway with anything other than like freezing a bunch of people and I guess changing their personalities to be more hateful, I think is something that
Hmm.
Agatha says. And
Yeah.
also like the possibilities of him conquering the human world just doesn't seem realistic
Yeah.
anyway. So
Yeah.
to me, he's like farther down the list.
Yeah, I would agree. I I agree. I agree. He's like probably somewhere around Hades for me. Like middle.
Okay.
He's like middle.
Okay.
I, yeah, I don't know who else. I feel like I just keep putting people in the middle. Everyone for me is middle.
That's such a Libra thing of you to say.
Yeah. Well, I was just like looking at your list, and it's like you've got Sanderson sisters as more evil than Hades, and Hades as more evil than Gaston. And I'd probably put him between Gaston and Hades
Okay.
for
I can
me.
see that. Yeah. 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 I think that
Yeah.
brings up a question though. Like, does it make them more villainous or more evil if they didn't succeed with their plan, you know?
I think the real reality of their plan matters too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, you know, Cruella didn't succeed, but the reality of her plan, had it gone through, that's
Oh, yeah.
pretty dang evil, right?
100%.
And it could have happened because she, well, she didn't hire the best people, but she tried. And when it comes to what you said about Calabar, it's true. It's like, okay, he opens the portal, he unleashes the, what was it, like 15 people he had conquered as his army to come take over the mortal world.
His army of 15 people.
Yeah. On Halloween, just like,
Yeah.
"Wah!" You know, I don't know. It just doesn't seem that realistic to me. I
Yeah.
hadn't thought about that until you said it, but it just kind of makes me laugh right now. I'm like, yeah, okay.
Silly goofy movie. It's silly. It's, to me, this is basically like taking a Christmas movie that's all about the power of believing in Santa, but making it Halloween. Like, that's,
And you know what? I love that because
and I
there are
love
so
that.
many
Yeah,
Christmas movies. Yeah.
there are. And I'm not, that's not a criticism or a bad thing. That's just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Believe in the power of Halloween.
Yeah. One of the quotes that I really liked came from Dylan, and it's movies can teach us about life. He says it like right at the very beginning. And I thought that was very applicable to this podcast and what we do here. But then also I thought it was interesting because that's kind of how Marnie has been learning about magic and that realm is through movies and books and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah. I really liked the quote, magic is really simple. All you have to do is want something and then let yourself have it.
Mm.
But also that what you learn throughout the movie is that you still have to work toward it and that asking for help makes it easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because through that simple quote, you think like, oh, I can get whatever I want by just wanting it. And that's not always necessarily true. If Marnie didn't have her youngest sibling there, she wouldn't have remembered the spell and would have failed
Mm-hmm.
at that point. And then at the very end, if the brother did not also believe, they would not have been able to defeat Calabar. So it's like,
Yeah.
sure, this quote is true, but also there are things that you need to work for. Like they also had to go get all of the ingredients for the spell to make it
And
work,
craft
right?
it. And yeah. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there's something to be said too about not underestimating people just because of their age. Like, I think the mom even says something about how, like, well, Sophie doesn't need to be here. Dylan doesn't need to be here. Like, they really focus on Marnie, but it's Sophie. She's the one that, you know, has all of these powers.
Yeah.
She
I love that
unlocks
you
the
said that.
gate.
Yeah, I love that you said that because Marnie, for the longest time throughout the movie, kept saying me and I'm the power. I'm
Yes.
a witch. I'm a witch. Me, me, me. And then
Yeah.
even right after they turn the talisman on, she goes, I did it. And then she looks
Yeah.
at her sister and goes, we did it. And I'm like, finally, finally,
Yes.
she's acknowledging that her sister is also doing magic, probably better than
Yes.
she is. Like,
Probably. Yeah. Yeah. Because they keep underestimating Sophie. They're like, oh, she's just the baby. She doesn't know. She's the one that's been doing all the things. You know, she like speaks to the dog and he chases the cab driver. She unlocks the
Mhm.
gate and turns it into a toad. Like
She's the
she's
one who's
really
always
powerful.
sensing. She's really
Yes.
powerful. She's like,
Very
somebody's
powerful.
coming. This is happening. Grandma's going with
Yeah.
Luke. And the one thing I wanted to say about Luke is also like, even in Halloweentown, there are societal expectations of how a boy should look. And it just breaks
Mm-hmm.
my heart.
What beauty. He got a nose job. Like,
Yeah.
what
Beauty
did they say? Like,
standards.
oh, he got a nose job and a couple warts removed, and now he's super handsome. And then he's like still insecure about being quote unquote handsome because he tells Martin, he's like, and I couldn't even get a date with you. And I was like, my guy, you're a child. First of all, you're a goblin. So let's let's remember that. And second of
Yeah.
all, it, you know, why do you want to look? It's, and I think it's interesting too, though, that Calabar turns Luke, or like makes Luke look like a human and he hates humans. But you know,
Yeah, but I think it's
I
because
don't
it's
know.
what Luke wanted, right? Like it's
Yeah,
not what
yeah.
Calabar wanted. It's what Luke wanted. And he was like, I'm going to give this boy what he wants so
So
that
that
I can
he
get what
is
I
my
want.
pawn. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
interesting for sure.
Hmm.
Anyway.
Yeah, but I also love right after Luke says that about like, and I couldn't even get a date with you. And then she kisses him on the cheek and he goes, oh, I didn't turn into your Prince Charming. And she goes, no, you turned into that when you decided to help me. And I thought that was really cute.
That is really sweet. Yeah.
It's like the same quote that I mentioned before in a different thing we were talking about, where it was like, you're ugly, not because of what you look like, but because of the things you're doing to other people.
Mhm.
Right. Like,
Yeah. Ugliness is more than just like your outward appearance.
exactly. Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe there's another goblin out there who's like, oh my God, Luke is so handsome.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
No.
Any other thoughts, notes before we wrap this up?
Not really.
No. Well, I'm glad we did this episode. There was a lot more to explore than I had anticipated. And it was fun getting to watch this again because, like I said, I've only seen it the one time, the two times. I think there's still... I feel like I need to rewatch the second because I feel like the mom and grandma have a lot to work out. But you're right. It does feel very turning red as far as like generational stuff.
Yeah. I was the whole first half of the first movie, I was like thinking of you the whole time. I was like, yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Mental Health Multiverse. You can follow us on TikTok and Instagram at mhm.thepodcast.
And join our Patreon for as little as $3 for bonus and additional content.
You can follow both of us on Instagram and TikTok, HB at Heather Bodie.
And me, Marissa/LB at littleben_notbroken. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with a friend.
Screenshot it and tag us on Instagram or leave us a rating or review.
Thanks again, and we'll talk to you again soon.